few slides about SB Agile first. So the mission, we founded SB Agile 1 year ago. Yay. Yes, and we just realized it's our year anniversary now. So visualize some cake. Perhaps next month we'll have some cake to mark the occasion. The mission is to create a living, sustaining Agile community, provide inspiring new ideas about Agile, how we can apply it in our daily work, and just fun opportunities to bring people together in Santa Barbara, network, make friends, and all of that. And yeah, we're affiliated with the Scrum Alliance and the Agile Alliance. If you are working towards any sort of Scrum designation like a CSP or something like that, we can provide endorsement for units or something. You can ask me about that. Feedback. We also would love to hear what you think about our meetups and how they were. And so at the end of our meetup, you'll notice some yellow high-tech forms on the table here. We'd love it if you could take the time to fill it out. And I should remind you if memory serves. Thanks to Appfolio for sponsoring this event, for sponsoring our guests here. I also want to introduce Llewellyn Falco, who is another guest that is with us today as well. And thanks to Appfolio. So just some housekeeping things. There's garbage outside. There's outside this office, pizza and salad if you want more water or anything, help yourself. And we have a sheet at the back if anyone is looking to trade information about job possibilities. I also want to announce our speaker next month. We have Craig Larman, who will be talking about large-scale Scrum. And we're very excited about that. So it's on May 20th at 6 p.m. We'll be announcing it on the meetup group. Probably cake as well. We've got to write that down. Yeah, and we're also looking for speakers at SB Agile. We would love it to have more local speakers. So if you have an idea of a talk that you'd like to bring to the group, we're all ears, and we'll schedule it in. So let us know. Yeah, and also if you want to volunteer for SB Agile, we have a regular weekly half-hour call where we just talk about the direction of the group and what might we bring to the local area to help grow and develop our community. So let me know. And some social media stuff. We're on meetup.com, we're on LinkedIn, Twitter, all that good stuff. And yeah, so super excited to introduce once again Marrett Puhejärvi. Okay, I've been practicing that. So Marrett is actually, she's here from Helsinki, Finland. Has anyone been to Finland in the room? Okay, one, maybe? Okay, cool. Well, it's our chance to do so going forward. So Marrett organizes several Agile user groups and communities in some international and Finnish conferences related to Agile testing. She is a software testing specialist at a product development company in Finland, specializing in construction design, and they do daily continuous delivery without test automation. So that sounds interesting. Marrett is also an avid blogger, and you can find her on visiblequality.blogspot.com. Also on Twitter, Marrett P on Twitter. But you could just Google her name, Marrett, and the results will come to her work. So it's pretty cool. So without further ado, here's Marrett.
So, we'll be talking about exploratory testing. The idea with the talk, the things that I want to share with you, is that a lot of times we just talk about testing, but I want it also in the short talk that we'll have to have you experience some of the stuff that it is related to exploratory testing. So we have a few exercises, so you need to also be oriented to do some testing in the session. Not anything very complicated, not anything very complex, but a few small exercises will be included. The things that we'll talk about are related to testing in general. So the way I see it is that testing is really about feedback. It's about finding things that are unknown. It's about bringing them out and having discussions around them. Some of them might be bugs, some of them you might want to fix, and some of them you might not want to fix. But I feel that in many cases it's been quite different to do testing in agile context than it has been in a waterfall context. I started off testing about 20 years ago, and we really didn't talk much about agile at that point yet. And now that I work mostly with agile teams and agile development, it's kind of the way where I always take my teams when I join my teams, if they are not yet doing that. I'm starting to notice that a lot of the things that we do in agile is kind of the best thing that ever happened to testing. Back in the days when I wasn't doing agile, it was quite often that I would find some problem and I would go and talk to somebody about it. And I would hear first that, well, yeah, it's kind of a problem, yeah, sure, but actually not a problem. It's a new requirement that you're talking about. Nobody wrote in the specifications that it's supposed to work this way. And then when it's not in the specifications, what we would basically do is we would put that thing in a database somewhere, we would hide it, and it would never come back from there. So it's kind of like a lot of this information that you would provide that nobody reacted on. There were also some problems that I would find where basically somebody would tell me that, well, it's not so relevant. We are so short with time that at this point we're not going to do anything. And I could agree kind of on, yeah, sure, it's not that important. Well, sure, we can go into production with that. But again, 500 typos, sure, we can go to production, but do we really want that? So all of these discussions were kind of like all the time that we'll postpone that whatever we can. And there were also problems that were really relevant. It was like all over the user interface. You could see it very visibly. It actually blocked you from doing important things. And if you would find these kind of problems one day before you would go to production, you would actually often hear that, well, it doesn't matter, it's going live anyway. So a lot of times I would feel in the non-agile context that I was providing information, doing exactly the same things that I do in an agile context. But a lot of the feedback that I was giving wasn't as well received. So for me, agile and agile testing in particular, it's been kind of like a life-changing experience, because now when I tell about problems with the continuous delivery to production, we can actually, whenever I find stuff, we can discuss that, we can decide on fixing that, and the whole tone of discussion around problems and feedback that I'm giving about the product, it's quite different. Even in the non-agile world, I've always done testing in a particular certain way. I've never been big on scripting my tests. I've never been big on writing detailed instructions for myself or others on how to do testing. So I've always been in the world of exploration, because I believe that's a way of finding things in a more like efficient way. But what we'll start from is kind of like giving you some ideas of why I've actually learned to think about testing the way I have. We're going to look at a couple of numbers related to testing. So this is my basics of testing mathematics. And the reason why I'm showing this in this talk is that I used to work in a university, and I used to talk to professors about my research and my teaching about testing. And I kept hearing from the professors that actually what you're doing is not testing. It's project management, it's configuration management, it's risk management, but it's never testing. And usually, whatever they were saying that what I was talking about is whatever they were doing in their own research area. So they were kind of seeing similarities and wanting to see that actually it's something different than software testing. At some point I learned that maybe it's actually better to ask them, what is testing then? Since apparently I'm really bad at telling what is testing. Like information gathering, using software, none of it worked. So I asked them. And it turned out that they think the research I was supposed to do is think of creating this magic machine, a black box, where you put in a specification, and out comes all the test cases that will find all the problems. Like, okay, so we live in a bit different world. So just to emphasize the kind of the world I live in, I created this testing mathematics that we'll go through together. The first number that we go through is number 20. Number 20 is related to a kids game that I've noticed that people in US have been playing a lot more than my colleagues in Finland ever. 20 questions. And the idea with that game, as you probably have already idea of that, is that you have a limited budget. Just like in testing, you can't test everything that there could be. It's just not possible, not even with automation. There's always more that you can add there. So you need to somehow find the best questions to ask. And there's two different strategies on how we could do this. The traditional strategy, the waterfall type of strategy, the scripted type of strategy, would be actually to write the test cases down before you start testing. And then as quickly as possible, you would run through the tests. You would have the 20 questions and you can ask them. But you can imagine that when you're looking for something that you don't actually know, you don't know where it is, what it is, you have pretty much no information, you know there's a problem somewhere. It's not the most efficient or effective strategy to do things. And it actually takes away time into doing things that might not be as relevant. So when you learn, you don't take the learning in. So you kind of like, you don't change your plans and focus better. So we'll play the 20 questions. That's our first testing exercise that we'll do today. I've written something on the paper. Actually, can't even remember what I wrote. I need to. Yeah, oh, no, I remember. New words for every time. So I have a word on the paper. And as a team, together, I want us to find out with 20 questions what it is. But we'll use the exploratory testing strategy, which is that we can think of all the questions in the world. There's good questions related to forking like a smaller area. You probably have experience of that kind of questions. You might want to think as many of those as you want, get your techniques up to a shape. But what you do is you can ask a question, I will answer yes, no, or I can't tell. And then you can decide what is the next question you want to ask based on the information. Let's see if we can find out what I wrote here. So anyone willing to start? I always really say in Finland in particular that if you don't ask a question, like maybe every 30 seconds, every 20 seconds, we're going to use one question anyway. Because like in testing, if you're paralyzed and just look at the screen and you're not doing anything, time flies by anyway. So you better get started. So, anyone want to start?
Is it living?
Is it living? Yes, it's living.
How many letters is it?
You need to say something where I can answer yes or no.
Oh,
So you can think of.
Is it less than 10 letters?
Yes, it's less than 10 letters.
Is it the name of a person?
No, it's not a name of a person.
Is it an animal?
Yes, it's an animal.
Is it a mammal?
Yes, it's a mammal.
Bigger than a bread box.
You have played this game a long time.
Bread box.
My
Bread
day.
box.
Bigger than this.
Or shoe box.
I can't tell.
That's one of the first questions you said.
Is it a herbivore or a carnivore?
Yes or no
Yes.
questions.
Is it a carnivore?
Is it a carnivore?
Yes, it's a carnivore.
Does it live on land?
Yes, it lives on land.
This is a pet.
Yes, it's a pet.
Dog.
Yes, it's a dog. 9 or 10, I got mixed up in the end because I gave up on my fingers, so I need to check back on that. So again, when we're learning, when we're listening, when the software talks back to us when we test, and we're changing based on whatever the software is telling us, it's a much more efficient way, effective way of doing things. You're actually finding new information and you have much more higher likelihood of finding problems that are actually hiding in the software. The second number that I have is number 16. And again, there's a small exercise related to this. It's an exercise about expecting the unexpected. So let's try if we're awake for doing some testing together. Here. Some of you maybe have seen this or similar thing, but I'm gonna, like as a group exercise, still gonna go walk you through the experience. On the video, there's two teams passing basketballs. There's people in white shirts and there's people in black shirts. And during the video, we're supposed to calculate how many times someone in white shirt is passing the ball to a white shirt player. So how many times the white passed the ball. since this is a testing exercise, I have a test case for you. Back in the days, before exploratory testing was big, test case design tools were big. We would do test cases in the tools and we would run them, basically the questions, lists of questions, and we would say yes or no, pass or fail. So the test case has an expected result, which is 16. I would expect that 16 is the right answer for this. So for all of you, imagine filling in a test case in a tool. You need to tell if it's a pass, exactly 16, or fail, something else, and then, of course, reporting the bugs related to the fail. Are you ready to test? Let's play. So how many of you would say the test was a pass? Exactly 16? A few people, okay. Did somebody get more than 16? Less than 16? Was there somebody who wasn't patient enough to calculate and count? That usually happens as well. Okay. Anything else to report?
Yeah, the gorilla.
Gorilla? Which one of you saw the gorilla?
Gorilla?
We're talking about a gorilla, so it's kind of like an obvious thing. Let's go back a bit. Still the same video, I'm not changing anything. Just going back on the video. If you've ever seen this before, it's kind of hard not to see the gorilla. And on the second time, it's kind of hard not to see him as well, because he kind of goes in and bangs the chest and leaves. So it's kind of obvious that there is a gorilla. Do you have anything else to report on the video?
The color change.
The color of the...
Color change, the curtain color. Did you notice that?
Yeah.
Okay, so you did. Anything else? There was one of the players, the black-shirted players, left the field in the middle of the game. It's probably also kind of at least in some way relevant. The reason why I'm having you do this exercise is that when we're doing testing, in particular exploratory testing, we're actually looking for the things that nobody knows they are there. If there was a specification or a test case or some kind of a document saying that here is a problem, the developers probably could have also checked that particular problem. The things are usually unexpected. They are the things that we don't know that they exist before we run into them. So we're expected to kind of cover the software in to surface these unexpected things. And the gorillas, the curtain color changes, players leaving the field, we're more likely to miss them if we have a very detailed scripted case telling us what to focus on. And again, if we find problems like this, like the gorillas, if we have a test case that says to count to 16, is it a pass or a fail? There are all these different problems that were not mentioned in the test case. So there's always this idea that what do I actually set the status of the test case to? And we maybe should be thinking of things in a bit different way. Which leads to numbers. And this 1639 is a number that reminds us that there's different routes and that not all bugs are equal. So again, I have a video here because I'm nowadays not on a Windows XP machine. And this is something that I would want to demo on a Windows XP machine rather than on my Mac. So we took a bit of a video on how things work on the XP machine. So on the video, this is not the same kind of video where you will be testing continuously. On the video, we're basically using WordPad on a very simple feature. We add some text there, and we want to change the text's size. So to be able to see what there is, we're going to first try to make it a bit bigger, and then get to a point where we actually see the text. So there's the little box there. You see numbers going in there. That's what we're testing with this particular exercise. There was the number 1639 that we'll use. I want to add it into the font size box. And since we didn't, on the first exercise, the 20 questions, we don't want to come up with the questions in advance. And we don't want to have the expected results from the second one. We don't want to have them in detail. Now it's very important to remember that we need to stop and think what is a plausible thing that would happen, what we imagine could or should happen. So we need to actively stop ourselves. That's part of exploration, being in control of how we test. So if I write there 1639, what do you expect will happen? It will break. That's I'd say a typical tester view that there's probably a bug there somewhere. But like if it works correctly, what would be a correct behavior? What we could expect?
Yeah.
The font size will be really huge, so it keeps on growing. Okay. Anything else?
Maybe it will just hit the max amount. Like you can't render a certain amount.
Yeah, it might say that it can't render a certain amount, so it might be going over the limit. So let's see what happens. So we change that. Gets to the right number, the magic number, and you press enter, and this is what happens. The number must be between 1 and 1638. So there's a reason why I chose this particular number. It's exactly on the limit, and that's something that testers do a lot, like search the boundaries and play with the boundaries and try to trick the boundaries. The thing with software is that you can usually do things in many ways. So this is not the only way to change the font. So you could also go into the... Stop that again. Right click on that and you get into the font dialog where you can also do the same thing. Now we've already stopped to think what's the right way of working. So if I write there on the size 1639, what would you expect to happen? Same error. It's again too big. So again we write it there.
That's fine.
Sorry. That's what happens. Now we get the other option. And I don't think you can see it, but it says there in the little box, it says 1638.5. And if you continue from here on, it gives you an error message. I think the video has the error message, like, does it? I don't know. I haven't actually looked at the video that long, so I usually stop here. So, but when you're trying to get to that and edit that, it's going to give you the message that actually you can't even enter that here. You can then change it back to smaller, but it's going to be kind of like keeping you in the loop for a while. So the 1639 is basically teaching me, or teaching us, about two things about exploratory testing. One is that there's so many routes through the program. It's relevant actually what you do before and what you do after whatever you're testing. So you can find different routes, and trying to come up with these when you don't actually have the software at your hands, it's going to be much more difficult than actually exploring the software intentionally, trying to find different ways of doing the same functionality, or imagining ways where the functionality would be connected. And when you find a bug, like we found a bug now, it doesn't work actually correctly, because there's a difference there. Either one of them should be different. We notice also that not all bugs are equal. It's not really that relevant bug to fix that particular one. I think it's actually more fun when they haven't fixed it, because I can show it and demo it in sessions like this. It's kind of a problem when they fix it. And I imagine like real users in this particular case wouldn't mind that so much. It's a minor annoyance. So we also need to do decisions on when we actually don't fix all of the problems. And we need to decide when are we going to use time on reporting problems because not all of them are as relevant. The last one, I don't have an exercise for this still, but the last number is to remind us that testing and software in general is very complicated, complex things. There's a lot of things to remember. There's a concept called human envelope, which basically means that people can remember only a certain limit, certain number of things. 5 plus minus 2 is somewhere in mid-80s. It was 7 plus minus 2 in 78, 79. And there's an update on the article on 2001 saying 4 plus 1 is what we can nowadays remember. That was 14 years ago, I think. So it's nowadays, if you remember one thing at a time, you're sometimes lucky. So you really, even though I talk about the questions and coming up with the questions on the fly, when we do exploration, we need an anchor. We need something that helps us remember the complicated, multifaceted things that we have. So we need to take notes, because otherwise we'll forget things. And we need to create reusable notes that we can use as checklists. It's really important. So this all is about experiencing some of the core stuff about exploration. So if you had an idea of how testing works from a traditional point of view, a lot of these experiences are kind of conflicting with whatever you have from that side. So exploration, it's kind of like looking at things from different perspectives. So typically in Agile, we would have developers with programming emphasis. We would have developers with testing emphasis. Someone might say programmers and QA people. And typically you would look with a different background, with a different point of view, you would look at things differently. From one angle, it might look like a cat, the picture, and from another angle, it might look like a bird. Or if you're a professional testing person, you might look at the picture and say, the lines are not quite even. Sometimes it's a bit like lighter there. They're not connected properly. So maybe that's relevant on how much you have pushed the pen. Or you might see that there's geometric shapes. Maybe that's the perspective that I would need to take. So you can find a lot of different perspectives into your software. And that's what you bring into testing. And that's the idea of exploratory testing. So we take the perspectives and we're trying to be disciplined about how we put the perspectives together. The most important tool to testing is a person and the brain of that person. And that tool is what we need to sharpen when we do exploratory testing. It's an approach, it's not a technique. Sometimes in Agile teams I see that we're doing exploration for the last 2 hours. We have this like time-boxed exploration. But basically how I do testing or exploratory testing in my team is that when I wake up in the morning, the first thing that I start thinking about is testing. Whenever I talk to developers and they answer to me back on what they advise me to test, I'm actually exploring their knowledge about what they think I should do, and I'm enhancing that from my own perspective. So the whole mindset of how I think is exploring, learning, putting things together, and finding the best way to learn from all the various sources that I might have. So it's really an approach, not a technique. It's a way of thinking whenever you're testing. It's also exploring is a great way of learning other things as well. But for the purposes of testing, that's what we call exploratory testing. It's to finding the unknown unknowns. It's to find the information that we don't know that exists and trying to be effective about that. So sharpening the tool, which is your mind, so that you could come up with better ways of coming up with ideas where to go look for things. It's discipline. You need to be able to tell your story of what you're actually testing, how you're testing, why you're doing what you're doing, and what did you actually do. It's not random banging at the keyboard. It's a performance, not an artifact. It's not the test cases that end up there. You might have the same thing. We were looking at the gorilla. You might have the exact same thing on the computer screen, and you're just there sitting looking at the screen. And actually whatever happens in your head, that's the thing that happens in testing. So it might be completely different. You might be focusing on the gorilla, you might be focusing on counting, you might be focusing on the curtain color, or you might find something completely different that you're looking at. And you can't tell that from just the document that says count to 16. You can do exploratory performance testing very easily. That's actually how my team does performance testing. So we have a basic idea of what kind of things we want to measure in performance. And then we change things around those. We add a bit more users. That's exploration as well. Or we change the data in some way that we find relevant, or find new scenarios. We do exploratory test automation, meaning test automation to make the exploration more effective. For example, handling massive amounts of data. Getting that somehow pre-processed so that then you can have a person look at that and find trends within the data. And we do exploratory regression testing, meaning whenever we find problems related to regression, they are of course regression problems, but the testing that happens, it's never exactly the same. it's always somehow different. The data is different, the user used it is different. I have like a pack of different users, like this is created 3 years ago and haven't been used since, this is created 2 years ago and haven't been used since, this I created a minute ago. And they're all relevantly different. I find different problems when I use them. And I don't always use them, all of them, but I try to kind of like rotate between these different ideas. So you can kind of think of exploratory testing as fine-tuning the tool that is the tester, the thinking tester. I kind of compare it to learning to drive a car. My sister, a few years back, went to driving school. And from her first lesson, she told me that she remembered only two things. She remembered the teacher take her to drive in the traffic. She was so much panicking about driving in traffic after first lesson that she couldn't remember anything else than that, and the fact that the teacher was kind of cute. That was all that she came back with. And she asked, like, can you kind of like can you help me remember, like, here's the stick and here's the gear, and what did you do with each of them? So then she was ready to kind of like start putting the things into practice that were theory until that point. But she couldn't remember any of that from her first lesson. And we learn testing kind of same way as we learn to drive a car. We learn first to look at some aspects of it. We learn to focus on the details first, or one kind of detail, and then we go and grow from that so that we can think of details and long-term plans at the same time. We can have many different kinds of ideas, and we can put all kinds of different ways of learning together with whatever way we're doing our testing and using our software. So it's kind of like there's different things that you need to learn individually, and then you can start putting them together. Whenever I talk about exploratory testing, I get to hear that, well, that's something we always do. We have test cases, but we still explore within them. And that's actually true. You can explore within test cases, and any good testing person, testing, whoever is doing testing, would do that. It would kind of be stupid to say that you were asking about 16, I'm going to say pass, and I'm not going to tell that I saw the gorilla. That would be a foolish way of doing testing ever. But giving it a name, it's been usually useful, and especially in Agile, saying that we also need to have things that are not the automated tests that are kind of follow the script anyway, that don't add or change things as much. It's good to have a name for the thing that we need to have there. And at least I feel so that exploratory testing is the disciplined way of doing manual testing. So I require a bit more than just like banging on the keyboard and doing something for a couple of hours. There should be a story that you can tell why you're doing it, what did you actually find out, what did you do, and what comes out of that. So you need to be able to defend your choices. It's kind of a big thing in exploration. So the way I do this, myself usually, or the way I learned to think about this is that I practiced a lot. Like I had an A4 leaflet where I would have basically empty sheets, and I would imagine it being split into 4 different areas, the A4 sheet. And every sheet on that paper was a day of work. So I would work one day, and I would then turn the next page. And I would use post-it notes to put stuff on that blank paper. On one top corner, there's a vision or a sandbox. That was usually the paper that I kind of like would move from day to another. And when there was a new paper coming in, that means I learned something new about my responsibilities and my sandbox. So I could see that from my notes. When did I change that? When did I format the few sentences somehow differently? And the sandbox was basically describing what I'm doing. Like, for example, I used to work at F-Secure in an installation team. And we had all these different teams responsible for all of the different components into the product. And my note said that I'm responsible for installations. After an installation, I would typically test firewall or virus protection or spam control or whatever different components to see that the installation succeeded and the product works. And I usually like the other stuff more because the installation is kind of boring. It's like install and check and install and check. So I would, again, just to keep myself awake, I would probably explore a bit on the other areas. But I needed to remember to go back to my own area, because that was my sandbox, that was the area that I was supposed to dig. Even though it was okay for me to play a bit on the other ones' sandboxes, there was nobody else coming on my sandbox to actually cover all the aspects that were there. So I needed to kind of be in control of where I spend my time. So it was my mechanism of remembering that. Current charter was a thing where I basically put a post note saying, what will I do today? Today I will test 3 installations, upgrade installations, and I'm going to do a bit more detailed checking after those, so it's going to take me a few hours for each. So it means I'm going to actually spend a lot more after the installation on that. And if I would notice that I would do something different, it would again work as an anchor for me to remind me that, hey, maybe I need to actually continue tomorrow on the same work, because I thought in the morning it's going to be whole day's work. It can be a 5-minute work just because I did all the other stuff today instead of focusing on whatever I was supposed to be doing. Then there's stuff about details. There's basically 3 kinds of notes I put there. There's bugs, things that I find that are not quite right. I can stop my testing, whatever I was doing, trying to cover right now. I can stop that and go report and talk about the bug right away if I want to. But I can also make just a quick note and spend the whole tomorrow on investigating them further, trying to understand how they reproduce and what kind of things there are. Then I have questions, things I would like to go and ask, which I found really relevant to make notes of, because I used to be the kind of person who would go and ask all questions as soon as I had them. And it's very destructive for developers when they get interrupted every 5 minutes with a question. So rather have like a few questions piled up. And I also learned that about half of my questions I had already asked. If I just stopped and thought about them, then I would have the answer myself. And the third kind of detail that I would write is X's, basically ideas for regression test cases for automation. I work in a team where I'm the only tester, everyone else is a developer. So if I have an idea of a thing I never want to do again, sharing that idea is a really good thing to do in Agile team. So I learned that best by testing things I never want to test again in that way. And the last corner is about other charters. Basically, what will I spend time on tomorrow? What else should I spend days on? And all of this, like details and long-term things, I get them with experience. I do them like simultaneously. But I could also take time on just focusing today on identifying new charters. So I don't have to do all of it simultaneously, but I can, like the tester is in control. That's the idea. So you find your own style, what suits you best, and you do all these either in the same day or in different days. Working as a tester, thinking as a tester, being in control. Working as a tester, thinking as a tester, being in control as a tester. What you at least have to get out of it is bug reports. You need to tell somebody else that you saw problems. There's a saying that a tester that doesn't report bugs well, it's kind of a refrigerator light that is only on when the door is closed. Not much use. So you have to, that's the minimal thing that you have to add to be doing exploratory testing. You have to talk about the problems you find. If the information is just for you, it's not good yet. But there's also other stuff that you can take out of this. All the ideas of other charters, the ideas of exploration, you can put them in whatever tool you have. Excel is a good tool for this. And you can prioritize them in a backlog way. So whatever is on the top is what you should be doing next. And at some point you will be out of time. You can see what you will not do. And you can make better decisions about how far are you before you're done. You can write playbooks and coverage outlines. Playbooks are pretty much documents where I'm passing information for new testers who are joining in the area, like quick learning about why this product exists, types of the things that I have like learn about the application at high level. And coverage outlines, they're checklists of what kind of features are there. I typically create those while I test or update them after I've been testing a bit, so they help me in the future sessions. There might be session sheets. I needed to do these for a project manager who thought I'm not working if he can't see in writing all the test cases that I do. So as a compromise, I would write down whatever I was thinking while testing instead of writing it in advance, and just categorize that. That's session sheets. And session sheets typically include also some kind of numbers and metrics, like where my time went, setting things up so that I can start testing, actually covering the product and increasing coverage, or bugs. I am stuck because I'm actually reporting bugs that I didn't think I would be needing to report, at least not in this scale. So only the testing time will actually increase the coverage. Knowing how much of your time goes into testing, it's a really powerful metric. and the different bugs, questions, ideas for regression test cases and new sessions, knowing how many of those come out. That's another metric that I typically get from the session sheets. I usually summarize them in some way. There might be a manager somewhere who's coaching. In my current organization, nobody's coaching me. I'm coaching myself on testing. I might be coaching developers occasionally on doing these kind of things. And especially when you're working in a team, it's also relevant to somehow summarize what's our perception of quality. And my favorite way of reporting quality in an exploratory context is actually Thumb's version. Quality, good. Something that we probably should fix, but we can talk about that. We shouldn't talk but fix. And how well do I know? Well, eyes closed, I think it works, maybe. I know something, I've actually used it, and I've actually tried testing it to the best of my extent. So you can quite easily get that kind of information, and I noticed at least at one of my companies there was a very powerful way of reporting about testing when you have 15 testers in a room with the product manager saying, we don't know anything, but it still doesn't work really well for what we know so far. So it's kind of a different experience than having a document that says that we had this many bugs somewhere hidden. So the personal aspect of it is relevant. To do this, the tester is in the core. Tester and tester skills are in the core. So one of the first things to learn on how to do these kind of things better is to find a cheat sheet. How many of you have seen the Elizabeth Hendrickson's cheat sheet on exploratory testing? Some of you have. This is a really good 2-page document. So instead of writing a whole bunch of test cases that will help you, print this out, make notes to it, and print it out again and make more notes to it. That's a really great way of doing testing. It has these ideas of how you would use a product so that you can think you can use it in a more versatile way. Like for example, let's take an example there, like Goldilocks is one of the heuristics. Goldilocks means too small, just right, and too big. You probably know that in the story. So whenever you have a field where you can put, for example, text into, don't put anything there, see what happens. Put just the thing that would be right for it, and put something that is way too big. There's also things like, one of my favorites there, interruptions. That's the coffee break test. Leave the softwares in some state, make a note where you left it, and go for lunch, go for coffee, talk to people. And when you go back, try continuing from where you were. Or at the end of the day, shut down your computer, or don't shut down your computer. Try different scenarios. What will happen? And some of the problems I've seen from this is, I've had systems where you actually can't continue, like it logs you out, but you can't even do the same thing again to the point where you were left off, because it's somehow the data, the IDs are now locked. So you will find problems. And this is like 2 pages of things that testers have learned in a very concise format. So whatever your role is when you do testing, this is very valuable information, this kind of heuristics on how to do things there. There's also another, a little longer checklist that I advise you to go and take a look at more. It's called Exploratory Testing Dynamics. It's by James Bach and Michael Bolton. And basically the idea with that 4-page document is that it splits things that you might want to think about into 4 different boxes. There's things that you might want to produce out of your testing, the work products that will help you and support you in testing. I chose playbooks and checklists for my thing. But there might be a lot more ideas, and there actually is a lot more ideas in this document, on what your work products might look like, what kind of models you might want to create while you're doing, when you're documenting your testing. The skills and tactics, individual skills that you might want to learn to be better at, so that you can find the steering wheel and trying to put things together in the right order, so that you're kind of like unconsciously doing them. So shaping the individual skills, there's a nice list of those skills. There's a list of testing polarities, which basically means that you think kind of like in the way of hot and cold, small and big. A long list of how you bring different perspectives in. So if you have trouble of coming up with a perspective, that's a really great list for that. And then there's test strategy elements listed, basically what kind of things you might want to have answers for when you think about quality and testing of a product. So again, a really good list in that sense. And the part of that I like kind of based on that list is the exploration skills. There's 3 kinds of skills. There's skills about self-management. my A4 paper is basically self-management only. Then you need to be able to do testing, you need to be able to develop ideas, find different sources, not just take one source and use that, but find all the sources and prioritize. And then there's a lot of skills about how do you actually examine the product, how do you come up with the different views and look at things differently. The tools you can use, and you probably should even consider using automation. There's other tools as well than just creating your own scripts. I'll have some of that on the next slide. The example that I have down there is from one of my previous employers. I was working in an insurance company, and what we were testing is basically an XML interface to calculating pensions. The whole Finnish nation, 6 million people, everybody's pension is supposed to be calculated correctly. We knew that out of that sample there were error messages that weren't supposed to be very common. The number 67 code means will be handled manually. So there shouldn't be too many of those after our system is done. We expected it to be like a 0.5%. It was over 50%. And it's very hard to notice these kind of things if you're doing individual things. So you are supposed to think of how automation enhances whatever you can do. So exploratory is not against automation. It's kind of like a way of thinking how you bring in automation. And the other tools, my typical tools are mind maps. You're not seeing the mind map, it's just there to remind us about mind maps. There's usually some kind of structure, you can see some colors there and some kind of like different groupings. There's usually features that I identify, things that I will put in the checklist when I work with the product longer. I stop using mind maps at that point, but when I learn about a new feature, usually I use a mind map first. There's bugs that I've seen. There's system level ideas on the left hand side. And then there's things I would like to do on the bottom right. So everybody has their own style usually on doing these, but the idea is that you can change the structure. Another tool that I use quite much in some organizations that are not yet buying into the exploration idea is the little yellow thing there, up there. It's called Rapid Reporter. It's this little field where you can write text with different labels. There's test and bug and setup and note and config and all sorts of different labels that you can use. You can set them up whatever way you want to set them up. It follows the time, how long you've been testing, and it kind of also keeps track of how much time am I, for example, using on the test category, calculating between different labels. So it enables me to create reports out of the data automatically. But to write down everything that I'm trying to do right now, I don't do that in most of my projects. But sometimes there are people who kind of feel that to get out of test cases, you need to have something that is as rigorous, and that's the way that I tend to then do things. This Windows software thing, so if you're working on some other environment, iTester, for example, is for the mobile applications. So like that's another note-taking, pretty much the same kind of thing as that one, except of course with Siri on Apple side you can talk to it and it can make notes for you based on that, so it's kind of a nice tool. So all of this exploration stuff, it's really about finding information. I don't go and I break the software. The software was already broken when I came. Just like anyone who uses it for testing purposes, it was already broken, we just surfaced that. So the only thing that gets broken by testing is the illusions. And there's certain kinds of, or different kinds of illusions. I kind of list the basic kinds here. There's an illusion that we think that the code does what it's supposed to do. And that's the first illusion that everybody kind of buys into, that we need to find the bugs, we need to find the things, where it doesn't work at all the way we meant it to work. But there's an equally important illusion, thinking that the product does what it needs to do. Like from the perspective of the user, we find new features. And in Agile, I think one of the biggest and strongest things that I've experienced is that we no longer, in my team, we no longer care if it's a bug or a new feature. We care if it has value for the end user and how it's visible for the end user. So we might want to break illusions about that as well. Then there's illusions about your process. Being able to deliver with a change in mind. When you start changing things, will it break? Heidi was mentioning that we do continuous delivery without test automation. architectures and clean, we're trying to keep the code as clean as we can within our skills. It's a big part in not breaking it, even if we don't have that much test automation. And then there's of course exploration that is based on discussions that we have there. And then the fourth illusion that we typically, or I typically at least work with is the business side of it, the business model. Do we even need this feature? It was on the backlog very high priority, but have we actually talked to the end users that we want it? Is this actually going to respond to their need? Is the money coming in the way we thought it would come? Like, does our business model even work? So on that level, there's also like a lot of illusions that need to be broken. And all of this stuff, I find that exploratory testing is a great way of learning about these things and pacing them together in a way that supports the organization quite nicely. It's really about serendipity, lucky accidents, and patience, continuing what you do. Like not giving up after 2 hours. You test it for 2 hours, you are not anywhere yet. You actually need to give it time. It's a learning process, any learning takes time. Serendipity, the lucky accident, it's the idea that it seems that testers tend to be more lucky in running into problems than people in other roles. There's 2 reasons. The more I practice, the more luckier I get. So you start seeing things, you start like building that kind of information into you. But also, there seems to be something inherently different in people who end up being testers, so that they just somehow do things in a way where they just stumble on the problems, sometimes even by accident. And exploration is a way of kind of begging that accident to happen, so giving it more chances that you will run into that. And perseverance is really about keeping trying, like continue, don't give up on 2 hours, you tested it for 2 hours, it's now done. It takes time, you develop your ideas, you come up with new perspectives, you sleep a night and you come up with fresh eyes and you pick your own results and break it and find new ways of looking at it. I think this is an Einstein quote, it's not that I'm so smart, it's just that I stayed with the problems longer. And that's kind of the attitude that you need to do. And if you actually do love testing, if you like doing it, it's a lot easier to do this stuff. And I feel that's one of my core things that I've learned. I find that the world has already changed. We used to do this like traditional testing. I call that commodity testing, like having the manual automation replacements. My habit nowadays is to outsource that to India and then get rid of it. Because when it's further away from our office, then we get to the exploration side much easier, like not focusing on that. It's easy to see the value when it's further away. So we get to the other side. So commodity testers, from that we're kind of moving more towards skilled testers, explorers of products and businesses testing as a performance. And all of this we do in the agile context mostly nowadays. So this is RSD's rapid software testing, agile testing ecosystem. I really like this way of thinking about what is included in testing in an exploratory way. You discover something that is worth building. You develop the design. You do all kinds of testing already to develop the design, to talk about what you're actually building. Then you build some of it. You build that as cleanly, as simply as you can, because you want to build with a change in mind. You foster testability so that you have the change actually in mind, so you can actually do that again and again. You can go through the cycles without problems. You study what you've built by imaginatively and suspiciously experimenting. You kind of do this like deep testing that doesn't happen just by quickly checking that it's okay, but you actually like investigate from various perspectives. That's where I spend most of my time on. And again, from that you might find new requirements, you might find bugs, and the whole cycle goes on again. And there's all these kinds of things that you can do in like different corners testing-wise. And I advise you kind of like to take maybe a bit better time and looking at stuff that there is. But this is kind of the cycle. So testing is the feedback that we have in Agile. Agile as such. And we just share it for the whole team instead of just the tester. So that's what I had on my slides. I have to invite questions, thoughts, and feedback at this point. Anything you want to ask? Comment? Does this sound familiar?
How long have you been testing?
I started in 1995, 12 years, about. I was a developer for about 7-8 months at some point. I was convinced that testers are not respected. Then I learned that average developers, or below average developers, whatever you want to say, they are not respected even as much as skip testers. And nowadays I find it that it's kind of nice to be the best paid person in my team, even though I have developers in my team and architects, so I'm actually on the architect's salary. So there is a lot of when you actually practice this and you fine-tune your skills, then it's definitely not an unrespected position in any way anymore. But it's more about not accepting to be commodity, not accepting to kind of take instructions from outside and being a passive person, but it's more about the activity. Does this sound familiar to you? How many of you do exploratory testing in organizations? Some of you? A bit towards that direction? Okay.
You're looking nervous.
I'm like, well, we kind of do. I don't know testing. I thought it was interesting. I'm actually in the UX department, but I thought a lot of this stuff kind of related to what we do, and some of the usability testing we do. We actually do write these tasks, and we have our customers follow through these tasks, but we kind of uncover other things while we're doing it, and I think it's interesting sometimes to not be too restricted to just those tasks that you might have, and yeah, it's a little bit more external facing, but.
Yeah, but this is more like learning. It's really about learning. What's the way that you learn about products? And you usually have different people with different perspectives on what kind of thing you're about to learn. Some people might look at the usability stuff more. Some might look at the functionality stuff more. And at least from my perspective, I'm kind of used to looking at usability, security, and functionality as the three top priority, performance as fourth. As the kind of like highest priority things that I need to kind of give feedback on. So just tends to build up.
I think exploratory testing, rather than following a strict, very detailed script and respond to that, is like, well, how do I ensure quality then? How do I, make sure that the right stuff gets tested? How do I audit it? And thinking about that, that's the exact same set of questions that comes up when people first hear about Agile and, what do you mean we just write a story and we don't write a specifications document that's 100 pages to outline every case that the software is going to do? You mean we can just trust people to, have these discussions and collaborate? So my question is, how do you ensure quality when you're using that approach? And because the answer to how do you ensure that people are building good software when you're not specifying every detail is not it just works better. There are a number of techniques that ensure that, like collaborating more. There are certain principles behind it. Can you elaborate on some of the principles that make that possible with exploratory testing?
Just like with test cases, you usually have some kind of structure that helps you remember things. I just opened this one example. It's ciphered really well because it's in Finnish. I couldn't get the English version to show up. There's also stuff in English there because I shared this with a Romanian tester at some point, and we had to kind of have two different languages there side by side. So just like with the traditional stuff, the test case oriented things, you can still have things that you have on your checklist that you need to remember to test all of these. They are just on a much higher level. There's for example, this is equipment history. It's a feature that we have. And then there's details hidden here, which basically says that the things that kind of on the detail level are difficult to remember, difficult to find out, they are usually written here. So if there's nothing that doesn't come from, it just doesn't show properly here. But if there's something that you can kind of easily deduct, we don't write it down. So it's not like saying we don't have any checklist at all. But for example, when we do a feature, we don't test all of these every time. We sample. We sample on the different browsers. We sample on the different features, and it's kind of based on the idea that I've talked to the developers and I've used the product for a while, so I know which areas are connected. So if you change this area, I need to also spend time here to see if there's an implication. So that's one of the ways. And the other technique is for auditing purposes. If you take a video, all the testing you do, and you write notes all the time to go with the video, you don't have even that detail of rigorousness with the old style. So there's just like different techniques of doing the same thing.
So I've been observing Marrett's testing for a while from a bit of an outsider view. I come from the Agile world where most of our testing is automated. So this idea that you could do continuous deployment without automated tests was unheard of for me. So one of the things I noticed really good, can you show really quickly the dark function code, or the dark function product? So this is a little piece of software that we're using for a sample to see sort of how testing works from this point of view. And I'm just going to show it to you really quickly to get an idea of like how she dissects software. This was something that was really kind of odd to me.
Where is it?
You can just hit the play button. Probably hit the little drop down. Launch maybe? Did it do it?
It's a bit slow. Coming up.
So this is sort of like a little sprite thingy. Yeah, just really quickly sort of showing your basics of how this program works.
Sure. Where's my test data? So the idea with the program is basically you have this sprite, either individual sprites or sprite sheets where you have different animation pieces that you can put together. You can identify the different elements here, and then you can create the animation so that you can have like a moving GIF, animated GIF, or you can have the coordinates in the sprite sheet so that you can use it in your game application to animate your characters. So it's that kind of a very simple editor application.
Right, and I had the same sort of thought. This is fairly simple. Can you show them the mind map you made for this?
I'm not online, so I'm not sure if I can. I need the web for that because it's not on my.
Connected to the internet?
Not here.
Do you have an Ethernet? Could you connect you to that?
No, we can try that. I wasn't expecting to need.
I have a hotspot.
Where's this going? From chats, okay.
Do you have an Ethernet cable?
Works.
Oh, we need that.
Oh, here,
Oh,
that
we can do
thing.
that after.
No, it should be.
Because we need that
Yeah.
thunderbolted after.
All right.
Oh, here.
Thank you. Is there a doctor in the house?
We have loads of these different adapters. I just don't need to.
That would be a very short cable.
Let's just try this one. It works maybe the other way around.
Unlike USB, it works on the second try.
I don't know if I have internet for this one. Nope. It's not that simple
It
to
usually
show
takes a
that.
couple seconds to connect. Try it again.
Nope. It's very small. The mind map is actually here. Let's see if I can take that one. Make it significantly bigger, because then you can see that there's a workaround.
It looks like you might be connected.
Oh,
Oh, yeah,
it's
yeah.
Skype woke up, so it means this one just woke up. I need to find it somewhere, because it's of course not here. Open from Google Drive.
So for that very simple program, and this is probably representing about 2.5, 3 hours worth of mind mapping, this is the map that she's come up with. right?
I
Which
don't
is-
know yet of pretty much anything about the product.
Right. But from my point of view, there should be like 3 elements on this map, right? And she has like this huge topology, and when she goes and tests it, you'll see her sort of being like, well, I haven't been in this area for a while, let me go over here, I haven't been in this area. Like, so rather than having like a set checklist like that we just saw there, I see her a lot more having this sort of, a much more detailed map than I would ever create, and then her sort of saying, which areas have I not been to? And that tends to be more the methodology I've seen her use to get this kind of robustness in coverage that I was trying to do by lots of test cases. Does that?
Yeah, that's really cool.
And then back to your point earlier about playing 20 questions, right? That's the, when you're then in there exploring it, you're listening to what it's telling you, and that may take you to a different place in the map than you thought you were going to go.
And like, for example, on this map, you see the pink areas there. There's questions like overlapping areas marked in a file. There's things that I don't know how they will work, and I will probably investigate further. Or there's just things that I already noticed while I'm looking at something else. And then it's kind of like my way of marking down that I need to look at this more in more detail. And there's more colors coming in as I kind of, I've covered this, and I'm happy with this. And it just keeps growing. And at some point, when if the product doesn't change much, I just turn this into a checklist, which is basically the format that I showed you in Excel. Because usually then you have to test all of this stuff in different environments. It's on a Mac, and it's on a Windows machine, and it's on a slow machine and fast machine. And there's a lot of these different polarities that you take into account.
It reminds me of the idea in an agile story that it's not a complete specification, it's a placeholder for a conversation, and it seems like each of these isn't a detailed step-by-step test case. It's a placeholder for exploring something.
Yeah, it's a good way of putting it.
So you don't use automation at all for those regression tests? You just have this checklist? That
When I started 3 years ago in the company, they had already been doing the software for about 20 years. There were different versions of the software that I'm testing right now, and they had never had a tester there. They had not done automation either, so they just put it in production and they survived. And they did that once a month. And when I joined, I started making developers do automation, and I started doing testing myself, and the visibility kind of started improving on what we had. And just me alone and the 20 developers in 2 teams, there was more to fix than they could do in a year. So we didn't really need more testers there. Well, like, we need fixers, that's the problem. So, but again, it was not an agile shop. It was not the kind of shop where you would actually like build with testing and testability in mind, just kind of the opposite. We had a problem with the unit tests that we were adding, that people are not very good at unit tests, but they don't have the practice. And they still add them after the fact. That's how test-driven development is way too difficult for them still at this moment, so after 3 years. We did some unit testing for like about a year, and nowadays when we've changed the architecture, they just vanish the unit tests. They don't even tell that they are taking them out, but they vanish the old unit tests, so they don't stay together for more complex changes, and they give up on them. So even though we have been building automation, it's on a very low level. And we've added Selenium tests. About the last 6 months we've been doing Selenium tests. Those are actually starting to get in a pretty good shape. They actually find relevant problems, and developers are really into them. And we have this what we call automation checks, or database checks basically, which is kind of monitoring the production on a daily basis, seeing certain types of patterns happen in production. Then we can talk with the end users more about what they're actually doing. So kind of like the feedback loop towards the end users is something we've been automating. But the level of automation is so low still after the 3 years that it's almost non-existent. But we're working on it. Maybe next 5 years we'll get something.
But you haven't decided intentionally that it's not worth the
No,
effort, and
no.
you're not going to pursue
It's
it.
definitely worth the effort, because even though testers as personality tend to be more patient than developers, like testers tolerate tedium, whereas developers automate tedium. That's a really good pair to have. 3 years with the same product, even I'm starting to find sometimes difficulties in coming up with new perspectives, and I'm heavily dependent on meeting people in meetups like this, so that I can keep myself, my machine in a shape, let's say that way. It's the thinking machine. Like, if you get bored, That's kind of the end of it. So you need to find ways of keeping yourself engaged. And people is my way of keeping myself engaged.
I have a question about, this seems to be heavily reliant on the person's ability to be creative and investigate things. So how do you train that, or how do you find the right person, and how do you train that?
I had, for about 2 years, I had a junior tester from Romania join our team. She did a talk about a year ago in Eurostar on her first experiences. It was called Fooled by the Unknown Unknowns, because basically what she did is she tested her first feature. She thought she was done, and I took a look at it and I showed her that it wasn't done at all. So that's the difference between like non-experienced and unexperienced. But what basically she took from that experience is that she learned the types of things I would pay attention to, and we started pairing a lot more after that and sharing information from that. So the coaching, pairing, talking around a mind map, what do you have here and what did you mean by this? Please explain your rationale to me, like why do you have these and what did you put in first and what are you going to do next on the mind map level? Those discussions are the way that you coach new people into this. And I've seen old testers in the sense that they've always been doing things based on test cases. I've seen them pick this up. I've had problems with certain people not picking it up. I remember one lady in particular who had the idea that she doesn't test anything if there's not a specific requirement about that. So if you are kind of set on the idea that you're not supposed to be active, you need to first overcome that, of course. But even juniors, they actually start producing really quickly when they're told that they're supposed to explore and they are supposed to be able to talk about what they've done and what they've learned. Right now in my team, one of the developers has decided to become a tester. It's been an interesting experience for the last couple of months, because he's saying that he never understood before what I actually do, but now that he's trying to do it, it's like a whole different world. There's so many different aspects to that. I'm looking forward to getting him to talk to user groups so that he could share that experience. But it's more on the learning to think in not just the one route that could work, but learning to think about the other routes that might not work, maybe. Other ideas, questions?
At one point you mentioned that you oftentimes in your testing you uncover business cases that might not longer be needed, like a feature. How do you uncover that with testing?
I usually talk a lot with the business people, knowing what they're using the product on. I have direct connections through business to our end users. And from those discussions, I'm learning just as much as from any other document. Then I make an assumption that this might be something like that, and I go and ask. So it's basically, I'm just connecting bits and pieces that I learn from all around, and I'm surfacing those discussions. And again, if there's a feature we no longer use, getting rid of that it's a huge time savior. So thinking about is there actually use for things? It's just about basically thinking about the different aspects that you might want to report on.
I think I have that experience every day. I feel like if you're into the product as much as somebody who's doing testing, you realize what's relevant and what's not anymore, as opposed to anybody else in the company who doesn't look at it in that level of detail.
And again, a lot of times, like in the old world, testers were told that they are not supposed to report on feature requests. They are not supposed to report on things that could be like unused features. But in Agile, we're actually trying to together build the product, and any kind of information might be relevant. So it's more about allowing that kind of freedoms and again remembering what was my sandbox. If I start only investigating the business side, am I going to look at the current state of the program? So you need to be, like you can go to another thing, but you need to remember to come back to wherever you were, so that you don't forget that the next release and whatever testing you're supposed to be doing on that, that's kind of one of the priorities that you need to cover. So you are kind of thinking on many different levels continuously. And again, you share this in a team. It's not just the tester, it's the team that does this. But one of the challenges that I have with my team is that my developers, I used to say that they are really bad at testing. But now that I sit with them when they demo, that means testing, when I'm in the room, and I see them demo and find a lot of problems, I've started to see that I've learned from Llewellyn there's this concept of holding the space, and I seem to be holding a space for quality and problems for my team. So that just me in the room makes them behave differently. They become really good testers when I'm silent in the room, as long as I'm in the same room. Llewellyn was telling about this idea that if you have kids and you have a mother or father in the same room, not even looking at the kids behave differently. So it's kind of the same, but they know that quality and testing is something very dear to my heart, so it's very easy to kind of see them. I don't need to say anything, they just do things because I'm here. And I think Llewellyn has the same experience on being a technical coach, that code starts to look much more good when he's just quietly sitting and being there. And you might notice that you have something of yourself that you kind of hold the space for. That people expect of you, and when you show up, then we need to take notes of this meeting, for example. So there might be that kind of things. Anything else? Okay, if we're ending, I have like a personal request in the end. Like I mentioned Llewellyn many times, we're dating, and he lives in San Diego and I live in Finland. He's actually moving to Finland for a while. We're hoping to get back to this very sunny, nice weather in this area. So if you know any work in this area, I would very much appreciate the hints on finding me a job here. I will need to relocate from Finland, so there's all the visa stuff, of course. But if you have any hints on how to approach that, I would be very happy to discuss it. So, thanks so much.
Wonderful, and thank you so much, Marrett. And we do have these feedback forms, if you would